To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting, and you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. And when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether you are participating virtually or in person. So now I would like to welcome our witnesses. We have Carol Bellringer, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Leslie Burns, Director of Oversight. You may proceed with your opening comments.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak with you this morning. As we were asked to do this as a workshop, I would like to kick this off with a roundtable and ask each of the committee members to summarize in one word what the first thing that comes to your mind is when you hear Public Accounts Committee.
Accountability.
I thought of the same thing. Accountability, transparency.
Audits.
You both took both my words, damn it.
Performance. Excitement.
I'm going to add following up.
How about we use the word examination?
Clarity.
Dépenses.
Expenses.
No one said boring, so I think we're off to a really good start. A number of you said accountability, and I think that the committee could more appropriately be named.
Excuse me, Ms. Burns, would you mind holding your microphone just a little closer or moving it up so that we could hear you better?
No problem.
Thank you.
Nobody said boring, so we're off to a great start. And several people said accountability, and I think the committee would be more appropriately named Accountability Committee, since that is a lot of what you do. We are here today to support your understanding of how the committee works, because it is a very unique committee. And I just want to start off by saying thank you for having us back. I was here in March, just before everything shut down. And I also want to recognize the presence of the whips here today, because it is very important. We appreciate the fact that you are here showing your support for the committee, as it is a unique committee. Today, I have the honor of being here with Carol Bellringer, our foundation's new president and CEO. She comes with a tremendous amount of experience in oversight and in audit, most recently as the Auditor General of British Columbia. And I'll hand it over to you. Maybe you can share with us what comes to your mind when you hear Public Accounts Committee.
Thank you, Leslie. You know, it's interesting. I was trying to think of that word. The word that came to mind for me was more about, I thought you were going to ask them what came to mind around them, their own, like how they felt about being on the committee. And my word was disappointed, because I have to tell you, it's the best committee out there. And I'm disappointed that I can't be joining you as a committee member. I have a lot of experience on the other side. So I was the Auditor General both in Manitoba for 2 different terms. You know, there's one of those things people do ask me often if I didn't sort of figure it out the first time. But also, I then moved on to British Columbia. So I've watched the Manitoba and BC Public Accounts Committee in action. I've had the pleasure of serving both of those committees as the Auditor General. And I've been involved with the both the foundation that I now work with Dr. Burns and of many others, but also with the history of performance audit and how accountability with the committees has evolved over the years. The foundation's been around for 40 years now, which is matching the amount of time I've been in the auditing industry. And I remember back to those early days when it used to be called the Canadian Comprehensive Auditing Foundation, and CCAF, the comprehensive, was brought out. It was the then Auditor General, James McDonnell, and his colleagues in the private sector accounting firms, who really came together and said, it's not enough for the public sector to know what the numbers are, what numbers happen during the year, so the financial statement results. They have to know what they mean, and they have to have more information to help them understand whether or not programs were delivered appropriately. So that was the start of it all, and it's evolved to a very mature place today. We are, as the foundation's, in a unique position of having a lot of knowledge from the audit side. We have great support from all of the legislative auditors across Canada. And we do international work as well. Much of it is funded by Global Affairs, and currently we're doing work in Rwanda, Senegal, Guyana, and Vietnam. But we also have that unique position of spending a lot of time with the oversight bodies. And our work with the Public Accounts Committee has been, again, since the beginning. And bringing together both audit and oversight has been something the foundation's very proud of. So, you know, it's been it's always an interesting time to see how things evolve. There's an annual conference that, if you don't know about it now, you will, and it's a joint conference of CCOLA. You're going to hear a whole ton of acronyms from the accounting profession. When your auditor throws them at you, just ask her what they mean. The CCOLA is the Canadian Conference of Legislative Auditors, and they meet regularly as a group across Canada. And CCPAC, of course, the Canadian collection of public accounts committees. And so the CCOLA and CPAC group meet once a year, rotating around the country. And this year was the remote one that was held in Victoria. I just missed that one. I had just left my position there. So it's a great time to meet your colleagues in the field. and also to bond with your auditors. So we've got a set of slides that they've been distributed to you, so we'll follow them loosely. I just, in terms of just so you know where we're at, I just went through slide 2 around what the foundation is all about. We do a lot of research and training, both in Canada and internationally, and really, as Leslie pointed out, very pleased to have been invited to your committee. Today, we're going to go through some general information about much of the research that has been collected is the gift of our esteemed colleague, Dr. Burns. She's done a lot of work in this area, and we have a lot of documents and background that we'll go through. And also we'll talk a bit about performance audit. I'll just, again, it's a little bit of what it's not and what it is and some examples of that. And then we hope we'll have quite a bit of time at the end to answer your questions about what would be of interest to you. So I'll hand it back now to Leslie. And if I'm, by the way, doing this wrong, Leslie, just tell me and I'll go back to the slides.
Thank you. We are on slide 4 for those of you who want to follow along on the slides. And the Public Accounts Committee is the committee responsible for overseeing that parliamentary decisions have been implemented in the way that Parliament intended them to be. So an effective PAC can have a huge impact on how the public sector is run. And they do this by ensuring that recommendations issued by the Auditor General are implemented. I know you might be thinking that your constituents don't care about your work on the Public Accounts Committee, and sadly for me, a lot of them may not have heard of it. But if you take a minute to sit back and maybe even jot down what your constituents' biggest concerns are, I think you'll agree with me that all of these have something to do with spending implications, and that your constituents do care about how their tax dollars are spent. And your role on the PAC it's different than other committees. You won't be discussing the creation of policies, and you shouldn't be discussing policies at all. And as an example, there's no point in talking about if a hospital should be built once it's already built. Instead, your focus might be on the process of how it was built. Is there actually a hospital there? Is it a liquor store? Was the process followed the way Parliament intended it to be? And your actions on this committee will improve how the public service is administered and how the programs are administered, and that will have a lasting impact on the programs that follow. It's like creating the road. We may all be driving down the same road, so if you get those bumps out now, those bumps will be gone for the future. But this can only happen if the deficiencies that are identified in the audit reports are corrected. In the United Kingdom, the Public Accounts Committee is a very sought after committee. I don't always hear the same in Canada and across our provinces, unfortunately. But you will be hearing later from 4 of your former chairs who will discuss the impact that this committee did have on them and the importance that they feel that it can have, not only for Canada, but also for themselves as politicians. And in the UK, the committee is often a stepping stone for promotion. There's a few benefits to the committee. You'll learn a lot about how government functions, and this will likely improve your overall understanding of many different departments in government. This is because you'll be engaging in a number of different topics. One week you might be talking about immigration, the next week drinking water. Your scope is very broad, but you're not expected to become an expert in all of these topics on your own. You'll have support because you're part of a system. And if you look at slide 5, this shows the system of accountability that you're a part of. It shows the relationship between the audit office, government departments, and Parliament. And working together, they can uphold an effective public administration. So it's the Auditor General's role to conduct audits of government departments. And these audits are going to be evidence-based, they're independent, and they're thorough. Audit reports will provide you with impartial and in-depth information. They study the audited organization in great detail, often spending thousands of person hours investigating the topics. And that's time I'm willing to bet that you don't have, your staff doesn't have. But these insights are all available for your use. This is a symbiotic relationship. The Public Accounts Committee depends on high quality audit reports, and the Auditor General requires the Public Accounts Committee to be effective to ensure that audit recommendations are taken seriously. And it's not a mistake that Parliament is at the top of this diagram, because ultimately it is that ultimately government agencies and ministries are not accountable to the audit office. They're accountable to Parliament and to PAC, because you are Parliament's you're representing Parliament. And you are the ones who are elected by the citizens of Canada. Too often we hear a very well-intended elected official who's frustrated by reading in an audit report that deficiencies have been pointed out year after year, sometimes as many as 13 years, and they haven't been fixed. And that frustrated elected official will turn to the Auditor General and say, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you fixed this? You keep pointing out the problem. And the reason is because it's not the Auditor General's job. It's your job as an elected official. And most Auditor Generals are too polite to say that. But again, the public service is accountable to you, not to the Auditor General. The Auditor General is there to provide you with the information that you need. And when the system works, the result is more accountable government. So as a part of the system, the Public Accounts Committee has various steps that need to be followed in order to hold the government to account. And if you go to slide 6, I just want to give a reminder that before we move on to this, public money has no party. So you often hear when you're on the Public Accounts Committee, we say you should be hanging up your party colors when you walk in the door. In this case, log on, I guess. The federal committee is very fortunate because you have an effective process in place. Well, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about good practices, and in these, in all of the foundations, you check those boxes. Often when we go into committees, we go in and there are practices that aren't being followed, and we're working with those committees to figure out a way to build those practices within the environment they're operating in. It makes it more difficult for them to be effective and to function. But that's not what we're here to do today, because as I said, you have all those practices in place. If you go to slide 8, you'll see a list of activities. And I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but this is a process that based on our good practices, a Public Accounts Committee ought to be following. I'm going to go into a detail on a few of these in a few minutes. But now I just want to highlight again that the federal committee is a model across the country. You are really looked up to, and if I do say envied. You have highly qualified support staff that can lead you through all of this. In fact, one of your analysts literally wrote the book to guide support staff on the support they can be giving to the country. You also have a unique practice that was started when Mr. Sorensen was chairing the committee, and that was a legacy report, which will help to guide you as new committee members into where the committee had left off before, so you can have a continuation and not a complete break as to where the committee was previously. If you can go to slide 9, this is our good practices guide. And I'm highlighting this just to let you know that we're not pulling these ideas out of thin air. This is based on numerous conversations with members of public accounts committees in Canada, but also globally, and on the academic research on what makes committees, and in particular public accounts committees, effective. You'll see we have broken this down into 3 sections: foundational practices. Those are often things that need to be tend to be based on legislation, and those are in place federally. Slide 11 outlines the actions. The committee is following very good actions to be where you want to be. And then slide 12 talks about output. And this really comes down to what you as individuals want to accomplish with the committee. If you want the committee to be ineffective, there are many ways you can do that. But you'll want to keep in mind that you are a cog in that system of accountability, and if you're not doing your part, the rest of it fails. And that is, can't remember offhand what the budget of the Auditor General's office is, but if you're not doing your role, you may as well not even be paying that, because all that hard work is far less effective, and really needs you to be working with the department for any deficiencies that are pointed out. So what exactly will you be doing? You might be wondering. I'm going to hand it over to Carol in a minute to talk about performance audits and some of the audits and give you a little bit more insight onto that. But prior to doing that, I just want to point out that one of the activities you'll be spending a lot of your time doing and delving into the audit reports will be in hearing. This is a public opportunity to get more information on what an audited organization is doing. And you'll invite 2 main groups of people. One of those groups is representatives from departments, and typically that's a deputy minister, and it's a deputy minister because that is the accounting officer who has the responsibility for administering the department. And I think Mr. Murphy will probably discuss that in more detail. It is not the minister, despite people saying, well, the buck stops with the minister, why isn't the minister? Well, it's not the minister because the minister is responsible for setting the policy direction. And it's not policy that you'll be focusing on, it's the administration of policy. And the other group that you will be calling is a group from the Auditor General's office. And with them, you'll be looking to find more insight into the audit findings. So your questions to the Auditor General would focus a little bit more on the scope of the audit so that you can have a better understanding of the issues that they've found. So I'm going to pass it over to Carol now, and she can discuss a little bit more specific on exactly what the reports from the Auditor General's office will give you and what they will include and how you might want to be looking at those.
Thank you, Leslie. You know, it's something Leslie already spoke about that I wanted to emphasize. The Federal Public Accounts Committee, as well as the Federal Audit Office, they really held in high esteem, both within Canada and around the world. And you know, I'm not just saying that because I'm here. It's been many years of observing that. There's no question that it's a big responsibility, so I'm not trying to scare you off of something you've been appointed to, but you also have great support within your administration, and you have great support from former colleagues, and it is, as I say, it's backed by a lot of history, but it is something that, as a provincial Auditor General, I certainly looked and relied upon the work of the federal office to help me. And they have a larger office, they have a larger staff, and they do tend to lead when there's changes in practice. It starts out of the federal audit office. So the tone from that office is very important for all of the rest of us. And it also it will be a component in your relationship with the auditor. I don't again minimize the importance of that. For myself as Auditor General in British Columbia and in Manitoba, the work with the Public Accounts Committee was the best part of the job, and it was for the staff as well. When they would come to the hearings and support the work that they had done, it's what makes it feel very important work. And if without that, it is that moment of, there's two elements of it that I often think about. One is you keep that report from being dust on a shelf, and it's what keeps the findings from the audit and the recommendations alive. And again, until it's brought into fruition within the auditee, it could be a ministry or external, but until those recommendations are implemented, the change for the benefit of the public is not made. And so that combination is very important. We don't talk a lot today about the relationship as well with government, or with the again, not on the elected side, but on the appointed side within the organizations that are being audited. But it's an important one as well. There was a book written, gee, it's probably 30 years ago now. It was called Cordial But Not Cozy. And it was the author was a woman named Sonia Sinclair, and she wrote about the Federal Auditor General's Office. And it's that important relationship with those that are being audited, where that you hold a big stick as the auditor, but you have to work in a collegial fashion with those you're auditing, because influencing that change is more than just writing a report and bringing it to the committee. It's a long process. I'll get into some of the details of what's involved in doing that kind of an audit, but it's again a relationship with those you're auditing, and then a relationship with the oversight body, with the Public Accounts Committee. So it's a lot about people. It's a lot about how they work well together, but the independence of the office is critical, of the Auditor General's office. And that is something they also need the support of the Public Accounts Committee to help them remain independent. They speak truth to power. It can be tough at times, but it's absolutely a critical component of the work that they're doing.
Thank you, Ms. Bellringer. I note that our time is passing by quickly. I know that we have members that probably would like to ask some questions. So if you are getting close to the end of your presentation, we look forward to being able to ask those questions.
Thank you, and I will do that then. I'll move through this quickly. A performance audit. I'm going to tell you this, the next slide is what one is. It is looking at programs within the public sector that they touch upon economy, efficiency, effectiveness. Those are the key words you're going to hear. You're going to hear a lot around environment as well. It is introduced often as the fourth E. It goes beyond just, as I had mentioned before, what's spent, but how it was spent. What was supposed to happen? And I'm sorry, I don't know the number of the slide, but with a performance audit assess, what was supposed to have happened? What were the intended results? Were the systems designed to achieve that? And within the organizations, what kind of oversight do they have? I'm going to, again, Leslie mentioned some of this, what they don't assess. The merit of policy. That's often a tough one in practice. It's easy to say that the audit doesn't get into the policy itself, but that boundary is one that they often will bump up against. So it's something to watch for. You do need to go further than just saying, I mean, as the hospital built was a good example. And yes, the hospital was already, that's probably something we look at more often in the provincial sector, but was the building built? But at the same time, it is important to know what was the rationale behind the decision in the context of, was appropriate planning done? Is there a need for it? Or is it something that goes to nowhere? So it doesn't get into the policy of whether or not you supply hospitals, but rather any other dimension to that can be looked at in the performance audit. when I get it, there's a list of the core elements. You'll see those in every audit that's brought before you. Important to read. Important to read the report to the as much detail as you have time to read it. You won't understand absolutely every element of it. You have researchers there to help you do that. But it's important to know what they looked at. It's a blank page when you start an audit. You have to determine what you're going to look at in the first place. And then once you're in there, you have to decide based on risk and significance, which area are we going to pick? And then they'll describe that to you in the audit report so that you can fully understand what was looked at. And if it's not in the report, they didn't look at it. So it does become important to know what the scope of the audit was, and then that will form the foundation for the questions that you're able to then ask the witnesses, those who are responsible for delivering the program. How are things going now? Have you remedied these recommendations and so on? The action plans that are put in place as a general course of business at the federal level are the envy of the provinces. Not everybody has those. They're slowly being introduced across the country as the normal course of business, but it's a very important, the follow-up piece. It's the the report doesn't sit on the shelf. And the other part is you don't want the official to leave the room going, phew, that's over. Now I can go back to business as usual. So you don't want them to just wait the report out. So important components of what the committee can help prevent. There's a list of, as Leslie pointed out, the list is comprehensive. You're going to get everything from national defense, respect in the workplace, and then special examinations, which are a comprehensive look at your Crown corporations, as well as financial information. So understanding what the public accounts means. Leslie, I think it's back to you for the Good Practice 6.
If I may, we have 20 minutes left in our time, and that basically is going to leave each party with the opportunity to ask one round of questions. So unless there are any other real compelling comments that you would like to make before we now open it up for questions, I think I should move the committee to that opportunity.
We could go directly to questions. If that's
Okay, are we? I do have a speakers list. Yes, Mr. Fergus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's not a point of order at all, but I just think that this is important.
Okay.
I would really like to get a handle of this. I'm just wondering, could we? I don't know if it's too late. Can we create an extra time for us to hear this outside of our regular meetings? Because to me, this is really setting the table for me doing my work for the rest of this Parliament on public accounts.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield.
Yeah, sorry. Greg said the same thing I was thinking was this, even though I've seen it once already, this is very foundational for me.
Okay.
If it's possible for us to get through it.
Okay, Mr. Berthold.
Moi, je pense que j'ai vérifié.
I checked with the people on my side. Yes, we prefer to hear from the presentation and skip the questions.
Your interventions, and certainly if it is the will of the committee to simply proceed with the presentation, and perhaps we'll have an opportunity to provide our questions back to our witnesses, that's how we will finish out the meeting.
Madam Chair, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
May I stay on for the second half? Leslie has to go to London to do a presentation, but I'm available to stay on for the second half. If you have any questions for the foundation material, I can field them there as well.
Ms. Bellringer, you are most welcome to stay for the second half of our meeting. Okay, Leslie, Ms. Burns, I think you were about to take over the presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And I think I can get through the material and also leave some time for questions. We can, of course, come back at another time. We do offer several workshops. This is a version of our orientation, and we do offer a more in-depth workshop on effective questioning and also issuing recommendations, and one that we did as a pilot several years ago for the Public Accounts Committee, the Federal Committee, and have been back several times, which is on actually reading the public account. I'll return to our material here for now, and we're at slide 23 if you want to follow along, and that about planning, because the most effective committees plan prior to going into a hearing. They plan their work. So you'll have a method for choosing what audit reports you're going to look at and in what order. Probably have a steering committee set up as a shortcut to making some of those decisions as a committee. And then you'll also want to decide as a committee in advance of a hearing or investigating a report what your shared purpose for delving into this report is. So they say that you should be able to close your eyes in a hearing and not know what political party people are speaking from. In the Yukon, they've actually started preparing all of their questions and then divvying up among members. So you may come up with a question, your party may come up with a question, but it might not be you asking it in committee. And that's a couple examples of ways to really be working together. Setting that shared purpose is important. Moving on to constructive engagement with witnesses and presenters who come to the committee. Your goal in having a hearing is to get information to end with a unanimous report. The reason that report should be unanimous is because you are giving direction to the public service on what to do. The public service, they're used to politicians disagreeing. It's what you do. When you come out and there is a cross-party statement giving direction, that gets attention. So that consensus really matters. When you have the witnesses in front of you, you want to keep in mind that time is important. It's not just your committee time, just taking you away from other valuable work, but also the time that an audited entity spends preparing for that hearing, the time of that deputy minister in that hearing. Those things all add up. Sometimes deputy ministers will come in front of you and won't have the answers offhand. That's understandable. Sometimes the material goes back years, but there is nothing wrong with asking for them to put a submission in writing. And a good practice is also to have a deadline for submitting that. And if it's something that you're not sure how long it's going to take for them to gather that information, completely fair to ask them, how long do you think you need to get this to us? And you have support staff that can help you follow up to get that information out of the department. Carol mentioned the one and done. You don't want them coming into that meeting, the hearing, and then walking out saying, we're over. You want to, they need to know that you're going to go back as a committee to follow up. So we have prepared some pocket cards. Some of you have seen these ones before, and I will make sure that the clerk has the electronic versions available to send to you. And if you want the physical versions, we can get those out to you as well. But they give you some quick pointers on asking effective questions and on issuing recommendations, and also on cross-party collaboration, which I'm going to get into. Before I do that, I'm just going to go ahead to slide 25, which just says, without follow-up, there is no accountability. So that's returning to that notion that if a department walks in there and says, yes, we're going to do everything that the Auditor General has recommended, here's how we're going to do it. If you don't go back and check on that, and you've got methods to do that through reports that you request from the committees, progress reports, you may not know if they've done it. You can call them back for another hearing if you're concerned that progress hasn't been made. And the audit office always has the option of doing a follow-up audit if that's necessary. And I like to associate this with if you say have teenage children and you say, have you done your homework? Often you probably check, is your bedroom clean? Do you open that bedroom door and check if it's clean? If you don't, you probably have developed a lot of trust in your children, and that's excellent, and maybe write a parenting book. The last thing I'm going to touch on here in terms of our good practice is the number one thing that we see missing in committees that aren't effective, and that's cross-party collaboration. I've already touched on some of the reasons it's so powerful for the Public Accounts Committee. It's also the reason that this is such a challenge for elected officials because it's not what you're used to doing in your job. The analogy I like to make is hang your party colors up at the door. Public money has no party. So when you're looking at the implementation of policies, that party affiliation is not as relevant. If you look at slide 30, it talks about what some partisan behavior is. So there are many different ways that politicians can be partisan, some of them subtle and some of them more obvious. You have all of the foundational structure in place in your committee to have it be nonpartisan. So you have the timing of the speakers, you have an opposition chair, you have an entrenched follow-up process. It's really up to you as individuals when you walk in that room to make that decision that you want to work towards a collective goal and have in mind that you want to improve public administration. We have some tips on slide 31 on how you might want to go about doing that. But I know a lot of you are probably sitting there thinking this is a really far-fetched idea, especially coming from somebody who has never been an elected official. So I am actually going to leave delving into that topic to the 4 former chairs that we have speaking after us, because they can speak to you from the experience they have on the importance of collaborating with other parties and the impact that that can have. So I'll turn that back over to you, Chair, for any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I will now go to a list that was handed to me. And I know that we typically have, our first round is 5-minute round, or is it a 6-minute round? It's 6, but given the short time we have left, perhaps we could ask our members to keep their questions short, maybe stick to a question, and then we can try and get through as many as possible. So I will move to Mr. Berthold.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much to both of you for this presentation. It's extremely informative. Mr. Longfield will have to make huge efforts not to have a partisan attitude on this committee, but I'm able to make the distinction between the work required for an MP and partisanship. It's the main difference between this committee and other committees. My question is, I noticed that you offering various workshops or training sessions. Would it be possible for us to have access to those training sessions to go further in depth? Because, for example, I would like to check, to look at the General Auditor report to know how to better ask our questions so that they are not partisan.
Maybe I'll jump in before Leslie, because the one word I know very well in French is absolument. Is we would very much appreciate coming back for any sessions you'd like us to guide you through.
Thank you. Ms. Yip.
Nice to see you, Ms. Burns, again. I always find the presentations well done and important, and nice to meet you, Ms. Melringer. My question is, how do you see the role of public accounts in a minority government?
We're waiting for one or the other to reply. It's a you know, I've certainly observed strong majority governments working with their public accounts committee, and I operated within minority government as the auditor on the audit side with a public accounts committee. The one element that gets complicated is who are the members around the public accounts committee table. It stays more balanced, if you will. It makes the partisanship less of an issue because you do have more representation around the committee membership table. Again, I think the same principles apply. It's still a matter of the constitution of the House shouldn't influence the behavior of the committee. I mean, it does, but it you know, that's the tricky goal. And I will say, Leslie and I were sharing examples yesterday. I'm not sure which was harder for me as the auditor, as a witness or advisor to the committee, when they would have a big argument in the House and then come into the committee and it was all gone away, or where there was something in the House that got carried into the committee. Both were very difficult as a person on the outside sitting in the committee. So of course, to the extent that it can be eliminated, all the better. But I think minority, it works under any constitution of the House.
Mr. Blanchette, Joncas?
Oui, je vous remercie beaucoup.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was extremely informative, as my colleagues mentioned. I'd like to make a comment. Maybe you'll refresh my memory regarding the training you gave us last winter. I assume you will provide the technical advice again if necessary.
Ms.
They're available to provide other workshops or follow-up advice. You're also welcome to reach out to us directly or through the clerk if there's any information that we can help you provide. Part of what we do is provide support to oversight committees in terms of good practices. We can give examples of what other committees do. We're often contacted by analysts and clerks both across the country and internationally to find out more about a challenge that they're facing or just curiosity about how other committees do it. And we've got that information and we're happy.
Thank you. I'll now go to Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I think everybody's dancing around the edges of what I just like to right now, which is whether it needs to be through motion or through perhaps consensus that we do in fact book a 2-hour session to have them come back, because there was I seem to remember in the winter that it was actually a much longer session. And what I really got value of, one of the very few documents that I actually kept, was how to ask effective questions at committees. It was great, not just for this one, but for all committees I'm on. I would love to have the full workshop on that, and clearly the full workshop on how to read the reports, because let's face it, it's such an arcane, very esoteric world that I think for all of us, we would greatly benefit from that, Ms. Block. And I'm wondering, through you and your chairpersonship, if we can just go ahead and formalize that, have those 2 workshops come back, because if my colleagues are like myself, we're going to have this good intention and we're going to leave this meeting and then we're going to go back into the busy worlds of being in a minority government. And I think that indeed, particularly because of COVID, the need for us to get crystal clear about our role as a multi-partisan committee here, hopefully non-partisan, that we just go ahead and define those terms really early and make sure that we're clear about that. So through you, Madam Chair, is there a way within the clerks and this committee that we can just go ahead and formalize that right now and have it as one of our next orders of business?
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. I see that the clerk has been furiously writing down your suggestion, and I certainly believe that moving forward with more training, I've seen a lot of nods on the screen, and so, in whatever form the committee would like to formalize that suggestion, I'm willing to entertain. I think some timelines would be good for our clerk so that she knows if you want us to move ahead with trying to schedule that in the very near future. That would also be helpful.
I would go so far as to formalize it, if it needs to be a motion, to say that at our next available opportunity, because this is really the foundation, particularly reading the documents, but this is going to be the foundation for any of the future studies and work that we do. And so it just seems to me that we build the foundation before we start bringing on other studies, because having had this really strange experience this week, I wouldn't want to see this committee go off the rails in some kind of, side circus or something else that could potentially happen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. So I do have a motion on the table. Are we clear that what the motion is? If we are, then I know I have Mr. Berthold who would like to speak to it.
Okay, it's not very clear, but we'll try. We have to work collaboratively. La question que j'ai, c'est...
My question is, we have a lot of things to do in the coming days. And for several weeks, Parliament, we didn't have any meetings. So I would like the motion to include that those training workshops do not take place when we have usual normal meetings, so that we can continue doing our work. The Auditor General will be with us next week. She probably has reports to table this fall, so we have to continue doing our job. So I would be ready to have those training sessions outside of the time allotted to this committee. This is my proposal, because I think it's important for us to look at the reports of the Auditor General, and we have an important role to play in that regard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berthold. I have Mr. Sobera.
Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. L'idée, l'atelier de 2 heures me convient. Est-ce que la présidente pourrait relire la motion?
Not having the workshops. Hold on a second here. My interpretation's on English. Not having the workshops during the time we meet. A full agreement with that. And two, if I may just pivot, Mr. Chair, to the presenter this morning. My one question I just wanted to put out there on these performance audits, in terms of are these audits looking at the outcomes of the program or the program itself? I'm having that differentiation. If you can speak to that briefly, that would be amazing.
All right,
So
I'm going, if I could leave that question just for a moment and go to our next member who'd like to speak to the motion, Mr. Phillips. Oh, Mr. Lawrence.
I think that's me, but we'll take Mr. Phillips. I'll be real quick. So I'm in agreement with what Deputy Sabera said in the spirit of non-partisanship. I just don't want to lose any time, because I'm anxious to dig in. I'm willing to do, and then the training. I know that some of the committees have actually been extended with a little bit of nonpartisan fun there. I've heard some great soliloquies from both Deputy Sabera and Deputy Furka, so perhaps we could extend this one so that we could have additional time.
Okay, Mr. Longfield.
Francesco and Luke both hit the points that I had, so thanks.
Great. And lastly, Mr. Weber and then Mr. Green.
Madam Chair, my questions are to the presenters, so I cannot speak on this motion.
Okay, Mr. Green, do you have the wording of a motion available for us?
I do, yes. Just to reiterate in a very simple way, that we bring back at our first available opportunity, which gives, of course, the clerk discretion to work within the comments as presented by my colleagues, to have workshops provided by the witnesses on the questions and on reading of the documents, which I believe they already have listed in their package here, but I would like to actually, if I could just speak on it for a moment. If I recall, they actually provided us with a package that had some really solid tools, cards even, that we could take to other committees, that I just know in a non-selfish way, you know, if I shared it with my colleagues, that they would have that at their disposal for other committees as well. So at the first available opportunity, I think provides us to account for all the concerns that have been expressed today.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Has that provided enough information for us to vote on the motion? Okay, all those in favor? That is carried. All right, I think I will quickly go back to Mr. Sobera. You had a question for the presenters, and then Mr. Weber, you did as well.
To the presenter, do you need me to repeat the question just in terms of brevity, or are you good to answer?
I'm good if and I'll repeat it in my understanding of what you're asking. In terms of what the audit report will give you and how the audit is designed, it is in effect both of what you said. Is it looking at the program or is it looking at the outcomes? It depends. Which is why it's really important to read in the report what were the audit objectives. So it will outline for you what they looked at. So I'm going to give you a provincial example so it doesn't step on anyone's toes federally. We did an audit in BC of grizzly bears. Well, there was an immediate, they're looking at whether or not there should be a hunt. Well, what we did do was a comprehensive review of the management by the Natural Resources Ministry of how effective they were managing the grizzly bear population as an indicator of biodiversity in the province. So it really depends on how you design. You can set out to look at something simply about whether or not the outcomes of the program are being achieved, but the auditor is not doing the direct work to determine those things. The auditor is looking to those who are exercising who are in charge of the program to see that they are doing so. So they wouldn't go out and look for the outcome. They'd look to see whether or not the ministry is doing that. So I'm not sure that I think that is a good area for us to get into more depth if we're doing another session in terms of reading the report and looking at what the objectives are. And an excellent line of questioning for you to direct to your Auditor General as well if you're meeting with her, because they can tell you a little bit more about the kinds of audits. They've got quite a few on their list currently.
Thank you very much. Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Leslie and Carol, for being here today. Great presentations. Dr. Burns, your presentation, you talk about cross-party collaboration, and your slide 30, you bring up what is partisan behavior. And just some clarification there regarding choosing favorable ministries or departments or departmental officials. What is the process on that, on choosing ministries and departments and departmental officials? Can you clarify that, please?
Absolutely. Every jurisdiction has a slightly different process for how they will go about choosing not only the audit reports, but who comes. In good practice, it is most appropriate to choose the most relevant senior official, which is the deputy minister, because they have they're the accounting officer. And Mr. Murphy, who will be speaking next, was actually chair when that became I'm not sure if it's not sure of the technical terms for it, but that became the formal process for who you go about choosing. So that's always the ideal person, and the reason that is the ideal person is because they are the ones with the responsibility of administering that department or organization. And the more information that you can give in advance to a department that's coming about what you want to hear from them, the better, because then that deputy minister can have the appropriate supporting people available to be able to give you the answers you're looking for.
Just very quickly, Madam Chair, regarding the choosing of the ministries, then who decides that? Is it this committee who decides that, or is it the Auditor General after completing an audit? Then it would come to public accounts.
Are you asking me that question? Are you asking?
Oh, no. Well, I guess the process, Dr. Burns, on that. Yeah.
Sure. The process, as I understand it, for the federal committee is you will choose from among the audit reports, and each party, as my understanding, is each party will choose the ones that they see as most relevant. And you can do that in consultation with the Auditor General, who typically won't ever want to pick favorites on an audit, but you'll also look to your analysts because they're tracking outstanding recommendations and what the action plan that the department has submitted says. So after an audit is complete, the committee, the analysts on behalf of the committee will reach out to the department and ask for an action plan, which addresses how that audited entity will be implementing the recommendations in the audit report. And then that information will be shared with you so that you'll have insight into what might have the most outstanding recommendations or where any concerns might lie.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burns, and thank you both for joining us today. It has been very interesting, and I imagine that we will be getting to know you a little better along the way for those of us who are new to this committee. We are running a little bit behind time, and so I will suspend the meeting and invite our witnesses to take their leave, although I understand, Ms. Bellringer, you will be staying with us. So thank you again. And we will suspend for now and do some sound checks for the witnesses that are joining us in the next hour. Call our meeting back to order. I would like to make a few comments.
Kevin, everything good with you?
All is good, Chandra. Good to see you again.
I miss Alberta beef though.
Well, we'll try to get you some.
All right. We will
We're
call
just
the
glad that
meeting.
we can be here today. I thought yesterday we might not be showing up today. It might be all shut down and. Anyway,
So
look
listen,
forward
we
to-
did,
to the
we,
meeting. David,
we,
good to see you there, and Sean and Dean.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, great to see you too, Kevin. Everybody, actually, it's like old home week, sort of virtually.
all right,
Kinda.
can they hear me? Can you?
Presentation, Sean.
Oh, so I was desperately trying to gain control back.
Interesting to hear you now that you are not questioning the officials.
Yeah, well, we'll see if I can make the segue for all my big talk. We're going to find out.
My mic is on.
What committee are you on?
Welcome our witnesses, and I will make a few comments just for your benefit. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. Otherwise, we would ask that you stay muted. Interpretation in this video, a reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And interpretation in this video conference will work very much like in a regular meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you're not speaking, as I mentioned, your mic should be on mute. So I would now like to turn to our witnesses and welcome you here today. It's good to see all of you. Mr. Allison, Mr. Christofferson, Mr. Murphy, and Mr. Sorensen, thank you so much for joining us today. The clerk had advised me that this would be a fairly fluid meeting, and so when you were visiting with one another, I thought, this is really fluid. So I think we will have, we'll start with some opening statements if that's all right, and we could go in alphabetical order if you'd like. We would like to be able to have a conversation with you, but would love to hear what you have to share with us as well. So we will start with Mr. Allison.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just like in school, I always got to go first because of my last name. So I'm going to keep my comments short. Certainly, I appreciate the opportunity, although short, to chair the Public Accounts Committee. Why I thought I'd come today was I really have got a great deal of respect for all the previous chairs that we have on here. Having a chance to work with Mr. Murphy, Mr. Sorensen, and certainly Mr. Christofferson. David and I actually sat on the committee in 2004 together, I believe, David, didn't we, when we both showed up in Parliament. So I just wanted to reiterate what they're going to say, and I'm going to spend less time doing it, only because they've spent more time in the committee, have had a chance to work longer.
Madame la Présidente, je ferai un appel au règlement, s'il vous plaît.
The Public Accounts Committee has got a great reputation.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, we have a problem with the interpretation. We can't hear since Mr. Ellison started speaking. Can we check that with the technicians?
Pardon me, Madam Chair. Yeah, no interpretation there. Is that what
Yes.
Discuss the interpretation. All right.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Weber. Okay, Mr. Ellison, could you start again?
Well, maybe my speech might be longer after all. Anyways, I just wanted to say it's an honor to be here today, even though my tenure as the chair was short-lived. I do have a lot of respect for the three previous chairs here, having worked with them all. I know they've spent more time working together collaboratively with both parties because I believe almost in each circumstance there was a longer tenure in terms of being able to sit in the chair. So I just want to say it's nice to be here today. I'm here because what the committee work does, the reputation of the Public Accounts Committee is certainly one of working together. We all know that's difficult in difficult times. And so I just wanted to say thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'll participate if there's some discussion, but really I wanted to defer to the three chairs that have spent more time in the chair on this particular committee. So thank you once again for the invitation. Ms. Block, it's great to see you in the chair, and I know you're going to do a fantastic job. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move on to Mr. Christofferson.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to come back to my second home. I just want to open up, first of all, I want to just give some shout outs, some thanks, if you don't mind, some hellos to the most important people in the room, the staff. Shout out to Dylan and Angela. You are blessed, Chair, with a couple of the most amazing staff people on the entire parliamentary precinct. They're very, very well served. I also, of course, obviously want to give a shout out to my former colleagues, Sean, Kevin, and Dean. And can I just underscore the fact that Dean went out of his way to come today, given the fact that he didn't have a long tenure, but him and I did start on this project back in 2004 when neither one of us knew what the Public Accounts Committee was and what the work was. But the fact that he would come back today to underscore the importance is, to me, says a lot about him, but it also says a lot about the importance of the work of the PAC committee. I also want to give a shout out to Chandra, who was nice enough to come, and he was on the last committee. And again, I think he's here because he's underscoring what that committee meant to him and the importance of it. And Jean, guess what, Jean? Remember when I used to talk about how tough it was at the beginning of the last parliament when I was the only one who had any experience and I spent half my time doing training as much as I was doing participating? Well, guess what? Now it's on you, and you came part way through the last parliament. So you're going to be a touchstone for them, Jean. And I know you may feel that you don't have a lot of experience, but your experience is 1,000 times more than everybody else. And I think you're going to play a key role in helping the committee pick up what I think was the culture of the best PAC committee we had ever. And I'd like to say that was during my leadership, but it wasn't. It was actually during Kevin's because of the makeup of the committee, because of who we had on there, and because of his tremendous leadership. So, Sean, you were great. I like to think I was okay. But Kevin's the one that hit the sweet spot with all the right people in the right place. Obviously, I want to quickly give a shout out to my buddy, Matt Green, who is ensuring that Hamilton Center stays at the Public Accounts Committee now for the 16th year in a row. Way to go, Matt. You're going to do a great job. And I saw Greg is on there. Greg has not been a part of this committee, but Greg and I developed a bit of a friendship in the last parliament. Based on our on Moriel and our relationship there. And Greg and Matt, I want to give you guys a shout out for the work you're doing on the Black Parliamentary Caucus. You're showing great leadership, and I know there's but overall, from where I'm sitting, you guys are doing a great job. It's going to make a tremendous difference. Last one before I get into my stuff. I got to believe that somewhere lurking out there, not far behind Matt, is my former right hand, Tyler Crosby. So assuming that he's out there somewhere, a shout out to Tyler and a thanks for everything that he did for me. Now, actually why we're here, PAC. I got to tell you, I am impressed. I am impressed because normally, now that I'm doing some work with CAF and traveling around more to jurisdictions, one of the most difficult things is to convince politicians that they need training. Because of course, we know everything when we're politicians. Nobody can tell us what to do. That's why we're here, to get rid of that old nonsense and bring in the new and the fresh. And the reality is that you get it. Every one of you, what I've heard, you're all seeking more training, and that is brilliant because that shows that you're, in my opinion, starting this exactly where you need to be. Leslie asked you what you thought about this committee, and oftentimes it's thought of, especially by the whips. And if the whips are still there, or the fact that they were there at all, that means a lot. Because I was at Parliament for 15 years, and I know darn well that the Public Accounts Committee, in many ways, was seen like the library committee. Just not health, not environment, not finance, not trade, some of that other stuff. And the fact that the whips are there, two things. Number one, it helps instill the importance of this committee, but it also, through the training, I hope they'll come to realize that if PAC is doing their job right, whips do not have the same influence on their members that they do on other committees. Because as has been stated by Leslie and Carol, you're into a completely different universe. This is not like any other committee you've been on. The sole responsibility of this committee is to provide the premier oversight for the spending of taxpayers' money, rooting out waste and supporting efficiency. That's what you do. And you have the power to make that happen. But that reputation that you heard about that flowed from the last Parliament, that was because at every meeting we worked really hard at making sure that our party membership was left at the door. That when we came in, we were a team. And so, Chair, I want to say to you that your role is way more important than in other committees, because in other committees, often you're just the traffic cop dealing with the presenters and the witnesses. And you're going to find, especially when you get into report writing, when you're in camera and it's just the group, just the team, that they're going to look to you, Chair, to be the one to help them when they're at loggerheads. And sometimes it's done with humor. Sometimes it's done with the gravitas of the chair. Sometimes it's done with the chair taking his shoe off and smashing the table, a la Khrushchev. Whatever it takes, Chair, your job, in my view, is to promote and protect the culture and to see yourself as a team leader, not the conservative chair of a standing committee. You are the team leader of the premier oversight mechanism for the entire federal government of a G7 country. That's a big deal. And it's a lot of responsibility for you. But I know you're a veteran, and I know you can do this. And that's why it means so much to me that the chair that I think we made some of the greatest advances under was under Kevin Sorensen. And going back, I think Dean would agree that John Williams played a major role and was a mentor to all of us. And back in the day, he was Mr. Public Accounts. And so he led that team, and that team was a team. You're going to break down sometimes and slide into partisanship. Fight it to get back. And please, I implore all of you, do not let public accounts hearings become a rerun of what you did at question period. Carol made a reference to that. When you do that, it may get a headline and it may get you a quote in the lead story of the day, but you've let Parliament down, because Parliament is looking to this committee to do that job, and that job can only be done if you're not being partisan. So when you're partisan, yeah, you benefit, you get the headline or you're part of a story, but you've completely blown up the culture of the committee, and it's the culture that gives it the strength, the respect, and the awareness that that you need to work together, and the fact that you are the only entity other than cabinet that can hold departments to account. The AG can only point things out. It's the politicians who can say, you shall do this, and you shall do it by this time period, and you will report back to us at this time period as to how well you're progressing. And that's why when you've got someone like Dylan, who's just a crackerjack at grabbing all these things, and you're going to find him and Angela are going to be such a help when you're doing report writing. And I'm going to jump around a bit because I always use up my time, and I know I'm going to lose it here. But it's really important, Chair, I leave this with you, that if you have reports where the majority government, now in this case, it's not that way. It's minority, which is really exciting. But in the main, when you have reports where the opposition are opposed to something and the government's in favor of it, or the other way around, when you issue that report, everybody looks at that and says, oh, the government's where you would expect the government to be. The opposition members are where you expect them to be. What am I really going to get out of reading this report except two versions of different rants? What is powerful is when, especially when you've got a big audit, because there are going to be times, you're going to go months where nobody even knows you exist. And then you're going to wake up one morning and you're front and center for days in a row because of what's going on in terms of the reports that are in front of you. It's not like that with all of them, but enough of them are going to be, they're huge. And so the thing that helps the parliament and helps Canadian people is if you go into camera and you come to a unanimous agreement. So if the government deserves to be criticized, then that language is in there. And so when you're in camera, the give and take, the government members in a perfect world are going to say, look, we accept that the government screwed up and that the audit reflects that and our report is going to reflect that. But come on, give me a break on the language, eh? I mean, really, I can't accept that language. And then from the other side, respect that the government members are willing to provide some criticism, but be careful of the wording. Listen to what they're saying. Work at the wordsmithing. And this is where Dylan is so fantastic at coming up with not only alternative language, but sometimes a completely different approach that lets you keep the points you're making, but allows you to get through the part where you got stuck. So, Chair, anytime you're issuing a unanimous, your committee is issuing a unanimous report, you've hit a home run. And if it's divided, it's not your fault, but the committee wasn't as effective as they could be. I would ask my colleagues when they take the floor if they can think of any reports that weren't unanimous. I know we always worked for it. Kevin, I think in the last one we did it all the way. Anyway, I'm going to jump around a couple more points that I really want to get out. Number one, you're going to hear a reference to the, you've already heard about CAAF, and I need to declare to you that I'm on the board of directors and I do some work for them. So full disclosure. But long before then, CAF was our right hand. And in fact, in questioning, if you want to talk about some work we did where they analyzed how we reviewed the public accounts themselves, and it was the first time in the world that had been done. So CAF is critically important. Another one is the PACP, and you heard Leslie make reference to it and Carol too, and it's the Canadian Council of Public Accounts Committees. Number one, it's the only real chance you're going to get to travel, and it's a great because you move from province to province. And I cannot urge enough for all the members, Chair, you in particular, to be at that conference because as Leslie has alluded to, the rest of the country, they look to the feds. You're the most powerful, you've got the most capacity, you've got the most experience, and you're on the world stage. Though provinces and territories will look to you. And though Chair, you're new, they don't expect you to know all the answers, but what they want to hear is that there's a continuation happening at the federal level of the culture that the committee under the leadership of Kevin Sorensen was able to bring. Because to me, that's just textbook. That last Public Accounts Committee was as good as I've ever seen, and probably as good as it gets. So I urge you to participate. And then the other group, this is the third acronym, is CAPAC, the CPA, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. And they're all parliaments. It's the former empire. Now we're linked together through a Commonwealth organization. They now have, and it started 2 or 3 years ago, Kevin and I were there for the founding of CAPAC, which was the Commonwealth Association of Public Accounts Committees. Now, it's gone through some variations and it's still trying to find its legs, but I urge you to keep your eye on that. And if they're holding any more conferences, that's the other travel that you should do. We did that. We went to London, England once to visit the Public Accounts Committee. We came back with some amazing ideas. Some of them are in the legacy report that we left, ideas that we hadn't got around to that we learned from there. But to wrap all this up, when I start personally myself, and remember, I'm a guy with a grade 9 education. So if this was about being smart with numbers and knowing auditing and having a great academic background, I couldn't even start to do the work. But it's not. The auditors do that. Your job, our job, what is the political part? And that's the key thing you do. When I started going to the Canadian Council of Public Accounts Committees, I began to see a bigger world. I began to realize that, wow, this is a big thing. That there are literally hundreds of thousands of people like Carol and like our new Auditor General and like Leslie Burns who dedicate their professional life to the issue of transparency and accountability and its role in strengthening democracies. And I first got a flavor for that. My first sip of the Kool-Aid was when I went to PACP, and every year I took a little bit more Kool-Aid, a little bit more, and by the end I was bringing my own thermoses of Kool-Aid because I bought in. I mean, this is a key component of any democracy, and some of you will know that I've traveled the world and done a number of international election observation missions. So I know some of the fundamentals of what makes a strong democracy, and the work you do, and I see your eyes, Chair, I'm getting ready to close, and the work that you do is critical. And just know that you're entering a whole world of people who are committed to strengthening democracy through transparency and accountability. And I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christopherson. As an aside, the clerk told me you had her blushing underneath her mask. I'm trembling in my boots with the weight of the responsibility that you've outlined for me and for us, and just really appreciate your passion. I will now turn it over to Mr. Murphy. Oh, you are muted.
Okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I hope you and the members of the committee appreciate that. That is a very hard act to follow. It's very nice to be back before this committee. I was on the committee for approximately 10 years. I chaired the committee for 5, and the 5 that I chaired was all during minority governments. So it is a unique time. I want to congratulate you and the other members of the committee both for your election last year, but also to your appointment to this committee. I've made a few, we've all been asked to make a few preliminary comments, and I've condensed mine to 7 takeaways, which I'm going to do as quickly as possible. And some of them have a little bit of repetition from previous speakers, so I'll skip over them fairly quickly. The first one, Madam Speaker, is, and this has been mentioned before, but I will restate it. The Public Accounts Committee is basically, it's fundamentally different than any other committee of the House of Commons. We focus on administration, not policy. And it examines, as Carol mentioned, the economy, the efficiency and effectiveness of government spending. And we really focus on, and we have to appreciate, first of all, that 99 point whatever of things that happen in the government of Canada are done well. We rank very high in international comparisons. But when there is problems or whether things can be improved, we look at what are the cause of the problems and have the problems been rectified. And really, Madam Chair, it goes to the foundational role of each and every member of Parliament, both government and opposition. It's to hold the government to account. We're not here to govern, but to hold to account those that do. The second point I want to make is the steering committee. I think this is very, very important. We have seen situations where they wasn't as effective as it could be. But really, Madam Chair, you're looking at the situation 7 or 8 weeks out, because you're scheduling deputy ministers, heads of government agencies, and the whole scheduling process requires consideration. Each party would have a member of the steering committee. You can take your time, discuss this, and you set the future work of the committee. And of course, the committee's recommendations or minutes have to be approved by the committee at whole. My experience was in the steering committee, what I would do, I think worked well. If we didn't have time to do all the performance reports, we would get the parties' representatives to rank them. Every party would have their first choice, and after that, it would be done on the rank basis. But it generally worked very, very well. The third point, David covered this somewhat, and we all have to be aware of government or opposition interference. You're here to exercise your own judgment and ask your own questions. And you have to appreciate there's a lot of individuals, and I don't want to be overly critical, in the Prime Minister's office and the leaders of the opposition office and the leaders of the other parties' office that don't really understand the unique role of this committee. They don't understand the role of the committee. And it's a slippery slope, and it's a slope that's hard to get off. But I've seen situations, Madam Chair, where we've had members of the committee who had a distinguished career get up and ask questions, written questions prepared by somebody else, and the deputy minister, whoever would answer the question, would elaborate. The member would go on and ask a supplementary question, which was already answered, but it was written by somebody else, and it just didn't look good for that member, and it didn't look good for the committee. I think one of the most, I'm going on to the fourth point, and one of the critical comments I do want to make today is I urge each and every member to familiarize yourself with the provisions of the Accountability Act. And that, put simply, states that every deputy minister and agency head is personally accountable to the committee, to Parliament, for the way in government programs are administered in accordance with government policies, laws, statutory regulations, procedures, the measures to maintain or develop and maintain effective measures of internal control. They have to sign the accounts. And this accountability is personal to the committee. And I want to say that we spent a lot of work on this about 13 years ago. David was in the committee then. We developed a protocol for the appearance of deputy ministers before the committee. That protocol was approved by the committee, but it was also subsequently ratified by the House of Commons. So it is part of the parliamentary law of this institution. So I urge every member to read it, be familiar with it. You're going to find situations where the Privy Council or the executive may not necessarily agree with the protocol, but it's Parliament and Parliament itself which will determine its own accountabilities. So you people acting as a committee will determine who you call, when you call them, and the questions you ask. So I think that's a very important point, and I urge every member to become familiar with that. The next point, witnesses, very briefly, it would generally be the accounting officer. That person can bring whatever technical resources he or she needs. My recommendation, be tough and fair, but be professional with all witnesses. One problem I had as a chair, sometimes you would get into a situation where the witnesses started to ramble and be evasive. As chair, you've got to lower the boom very quickly on that kind of behavior. Perhaps even before the meeting starts, you can warn them, we're not going to put up with that, and make that a culture of the committee. And one trick that members can have, if you're not getting fulsome answers, just ask the witness to give a full report on that issue and file a report with the clerk of the committee, and the clerk of the committee will subsequently distribute it to other members of the committee. They don't like that, but then you'll have a culture that you want answers, and you want clear answers, and you want succinct answers. Action, the next point I want to cover, action plans, very important. A lot of times this completes the circle here. We have the auditor's performance report, we have the auditor's recommendations, government response, the hearing, the PAC report, and then that was the end of it. But now we have the action plans in there, but there has to be follow-up in the action plans, and there has to be follow-up that they're doing what they said they promised that they would do. And if the committee sees any slippage or departments or agencies not doing what they promised to do, call them back before the committee and just make sure that the full circle. Just finally, in my comments, a few remarks, Madam Chair. You do have a tough job in a minority government. You have to balance the fundamental role of the committee with the directions of the three opposition parties, not the government party and the two other opposition parties. I recommend you try and develop a very, very close relationship with the Auditor General, perhaps with the Comptroller General and the committee staff, of course. And again, a lot of your time will be spent planning future agendas, providing leadership to the planning of the committee's work. As David says, you try to seek unanimity on your reports if it's possible. In my tenure as chair, I think there was only about 2 occasions where I recall we did not have unanimous reports. So it generally will work out. And of course, maintain order and decorum. But one other thing that I thought worked well, Madam Chair, is when I was around, and it depends on the personalities, but I always felt it beneficial to have socials with the staff of the Auditor General and your committee, and perhaps your staff, and get together. It used to be, and of course you don't have it now, a separate room off the dining room, but I don't know what's there now, but I always found them beneficial where people could discuss in a more relaxed setting and get to know each other better. And these events worked, I thought worked very well. I think I may be up in time, and I just want to say again, it's been a pleasure before this committee, and I wish you and every member of the committee all the best.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murphy. Yes, people are applauding. Mr. Sorensen, we'll move on to you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and it's a real pleasure to be here again today. I want to, as Mr. Christofferson did, I want to kind of give a shout out to all my former members of this PAC committee, including the chairs. You've heard David Christofferson, Sean Murphy, and Dean Allison, and all of these brought something new to our committee, and certainly did a great job in chairing. And I know, Madam Chair, that you will also, even in the way that you've conducted yourself so far. I want to thank Leslie Burns and Ms. Bellringer for the hour previous. I think the committee and each one of the members of the committee recognized the value of CAAF and what they bring to your committee. And so I'm pleased that the committee is asked to meet with them again. That was part of what I was going to bring today. To the new members of the committee, I would just like to introduce myself a little bit. I'm Kevin Sorensen. I was served as a member of Parliament for 19 years. I served on a number of committees, but I did chair Foreign Affairs Committee. I chaired the Afghanistan mission. I chaired Public Safety and National Security. I served as Minister of State for Finance. And then in the last 4 years, pardon me, I served as Public Accounts Committee. Now, I tell you that not to kind of bring attention to what I've accomplished or haven't accomplished, but rather to say this, that in 15 years before becoming a member of the Public Accounts Committee, in 15 years serving in all those capacities, I had very little idea as what Public Accounts Committee was all about. I understood that they were to give transparency and accountability to government, but I did not understand the intricacies and the issues that the committee would be looking at. I knew they worked with the Auditor General, but I wasn't certain exactly how. And so in our first meeting, I recall meeting with CAAF and coming there, and that meeting, Sean Murphy was there. And I thought, why do I, as a Conservative member, want to sit and listen to this former Liberal chair, on a CAAF? And, has CAAF drank the Kool-Aid here, and are they just, going along with the old government? I found out again how wrong I was. I knew Sean as a strong debater in the House of Commons, but I didn't really know him as the chair of the committee. Then when I sat down and I looked across and saw David Christofferson there, I said, what are the chances that we will have a non-partisan committee with Christofferson there? And that was because he was a powerful debater in the House of Commons. But let me tell you again, that these individuals were key, as were the Liberals, Madam Mendez. They were very key in making it very simple for me as a chair to carry on in a nonpartisan way. And that is exactly what your committee should be doing. I want to encourage you to continue to use CAAF and to do everything you can to remain nonpartisan. Sean has mentioned some of this. Our committee in PAC is responsible not for the policy directives that a government brings. Every party will have different policy. Our focus must be on how does departments carry out that policy? How do they bring about the policy that the government directive that their mandate has been? And as Sean said, we are looking at the administrative roles. When it comes down to debate in the House of Commons or to an election, each one of you as members of the committee will be able to debate and question the policy that that other government has. But regardless of whether we agree with it or disagree with it, we expect that in a liberal democracy that we have, that a government department can carry out the mandate given to it by the government. And if they can't, if they stall policy, if they refuse in some way, as in some third world countries, to bring about the government's policy, then we have a very, very deep problem. And then PAC becomes very important, and as we already are. I remember in our PAC, and I want to just quickly on this, going to the British Parliament, as Mr. Christofferson said, and Meg Hillier said that she loves to sit back in her chair, close her eyes, and say, which party brought that question? And I think CAAF mentioned the same. You should be able to listen to the questions. They are in a nonpartisan way. They don't give a big background to the question, slamming governments. They are simply looking at the departments. And so that is a goal. I also want to say that each individual has talked about the uniqueness of this committee, and it is so unique. As far as I know, it's the only committee that has an action plan for follow-up. And Dylan and Angela are a big part of that and very important in bringing that about. But we must follow up in exactly the reasons that Leslie said. You do it with your teenage children, you do it with other places in business where you have, it's imperative that you do it here. And transparency and accountability to the departments is exactly what it's about. You are a member of a committee that has an opportunity to understand whole of government. You are a member of a committee that will understand a little bit about every department that the AG studies. And if you're a first-time member of Parliament, I think you have the best orientation possible when you serve on Public Accounts Committee, because you will learn a little bit about each department. And so good for you. I think also you will be given a copy of the Public Accounts of Canada. They'll sit on your bookshelf, and they take up about 2 feet of bookshelf space. And like most people, when you open this up, your eyes just glaze over and you flip through them very quickly. When you get to understand the public accounts, and I know how to read financial statements, but until CAAF comes in and they bring a former member of the Auditor General's department, and they go through each book and each, you will be able to tell how many iPhones were lost by government, or how many iPhones members of Parliament lost, where the waste is in government, what they're paying for some of the resources that they have. Good for you for recognizing that you go back to CAAF and you get these types of briefings, because it will help you do your job. I just want to quickly close with this. And again, it's been mentioned. Chair, you are vital to the functioning of a good committee. We have had, over the 4 years that I served, number of times where we would hear last moment that that the department was bringing in a assistant to the deputy, or way down the line, they were bringing someone to come and take the deputy minister's place in Parliament. I remember sitting at home once because I was broke my shoulder, And watching Alexandra Mendez, when a department came and it wasn't the deputy minister that they promised, it was someone else, she refused to open the meeting. We expect the accountable deputy minister to be there, and he is the deputy minister. He is the accounting officer of that department. That is absolutely key. There are occasions where they will, because of a death in a family, be unable to be there or other extenuating circumstances. The committee then may be asked, will you take someone else? And we have met. But typically, this committee gets the answers from the one who is accountable, and that's the deputy minister. Mr. Christofferson talked about the other opportunities you will have through CCPAC and the Commonwealth PAC. All of these are good, although with COVID on, I'm not certain how many of them you will be able to travel to. But let me say that you are a very important committee in Parliament, and especially in a minority. In a minority Parliament, you become more important than ever. Accountability and transparency, and I'll cut some of my comments to that out. We drew up a legacy report of what we've accomplished and what we wished we'd accomplished. Plan on being accountable as a committee to doing those type of things. One of the measures that we brought forward was we asked CAAF to do a report card on the conduct of our committee. How were we functioning? Were we missing out in this area? And give us quarterly or maybe semi-annual reports as to how we can better ourselves as a committee. Very positive and a very, very important to do things like that, so you don't just stay in the rut that you might find yourself getting into. They are a non-partisan group that will give you a fair assessment as to the measurement of how you as a committee are responding. And also, Chair, there will be times when you will have to bring in, called into order when someone begins to do it. Build a relationship with your committee, build up respect so that they know that you are not a homer for your party, but that they can count on you. And I think that's part of what we did. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. I want to thank again the committee for the job that they will do, and for the amount that they will learn in doing this. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sorensen. Again, we're seeing applause for your comments. I'm very aware that we have very little time left to us in order to ask some questions. I think we have 5 minutes, and I know that we want to respect the time not only of our witnesses who committed to being here for an hour, but our members who more than likely have other things on their schedules. However, having said that, we do have 5 minutes, and I know we started late. We started 10 minutes late, and then even had to do some sound checks. So I see that I do have a list of speakers who would like to perhaps ask some questions, and this is a more fluid part of our meeting today. So I will start with Mr. Arya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's really a pleasure for me to come back to this committee, which I served for full 4 years in my first term, and a great opportunity to work with Kevin Sorensen and David Christofferson. Honestly, Madam Chair, till I became a member, I did not know what this committee was all about, but soon learned about it. I know time is very limited. Christofferson and Kevin, they have already mentioned the things that are important to the committee, but I just have a small question. Maybe they can address it. David, Kevin, I know you guys touched on it, but can you please tell the committee how we were able to work together so that I think we did the maximum number of studies of any committee in the parliamentary history. And every single report, I think it was unanimous. Can you just highlight certain key points which the members can take with them to to achieve the same kind of wonderful results we had under the leadership of Kevin, under the ultra partisan David Christopherson when it comes to questioning, but a great person helping us all in developing the reports on behalf of the committee.
Well, I'll just very quickly start and say that, again, I had a good committee and I think we were all bought into this, but there is a great deal of power in wordsmithing. And, you know, you don't want, and I remember one occasion where Mr. Christopherson was absolutely adamant that we are not going to weaken our stand on a certain point. And then you had government who were, you know, uncertain about some of the wording. And, you know, we were able to, I know that Mr. Christopherson and Ms. Mendez and others, and in the Conservative Party as well, were able to meet on a side meeting and work things out and wordsmith things so that they could come up with something. Why is it important to have unanimous reports? Because if a department sees that your reports are not unanimous, they can say, well, listen, they don't even agree amongst themselves as a committee, so why is it important that we really make the changes that they're asking for? So we had over 70 committee reports. I know that. It might have been 80. Angela would know and Dylan would know, but all of them were unanimous. And it wasn't just that we rubber stamped everything. It was that there was a little occasionally water in the wine, but typically it was we were able to wordsmith and hold the force, but not give up on the department. David, take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. Just to build on what you said, because you really nailed it. To me, I think, Chandra, what made it work was that we were all goal-oriented. Our goal was to have the best report that we could and be unanimous. And so the respect that we had. So, Chandra, I see you and I would often be at odds at our starting point. We would look at something and I would say, I think that's a huge deal. And you would say, well, it's important, but I'm not sure it's huge. But we would always find a way to come to agreement because we knew our goal was not to make a great speech. Our goal was to get a unanimous report that reflected the findings of the Auditor General and reflected our political will to see it done. I want to underscore, and I appreciate Kevin mentioning Alexandra a couple of times, because she, to me, is the poster child of what it is to be a parliamentarian on a PAC committee. And I'll take just 30 seconds to give you the example. In the last parliament, Kevin, I think it was like within weeks, months, if not weeks, before we left to go into the last election, we were in, I'm not going to recreate the dynamics, but we were in a big political problem. And it was necessary for the committee to do its job and criticize the government on a big deal. And Alexandra, as the government lead, was the one that was prepared to make sure that the government side agreed in principle with the issue at hand, but we had to find language. And that's the one that Kevin was actually referring to. It was so sensitive. We're heading into the election. We wanted to remain united. But hey, I wasn't running again. I knew everybody on the liberal side was. So I had to put some water in my wine and understand that, hey, you got to understand the politics of where they are. And at the end of the day, because of that respect and putting each other in other's shoes, we were able to find language where the committee unanimously condemned the government in writing. It was a special letter that went out. It was a big deal. This was not in Alexandra's best interest. This was not in the interest of her party. But what it was in the interest of Parliament and the Canadian taxpayer. And she made that the priority over her party and her own re-election. And to me, that and the fact that Kevin, as a Conservative, would be the one to first raise that role that Alexandra played as a Liberal points to the fact that when we see each other and we're talking public accounts, we don't see those partisan lines. They don't exist. All we see is another parliamentarian. We're on the same team, and our job is to make sure that the government of the day is held accountable for the way that money was spent and implemented. And that means the deputies held to account. Remember, one of our mottos is when a deputy minister finds out they've been asked to appear before the Public Accounts Committee as a witness, it should ruin their whole week, because they would know they're being chosen because there's a problem, and they're going to have to face the music. And the other thing I want to leave with everybody is, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is change behavior, not gotcha. And by changing behavior, what that means is, if you're doing your job, you've got deputies and assistant deputies who are thinking ahead as they're looking at a problem in front of them and realizing if this isn't handled right, they're going to end up in front of the Public Accounts Committee, and we know what happens when you get there. And so you only get that reputation by doing two things, in my opinion. One, criticize where it is necessary. And a government member commenting on the inefficiencies of a department carries a lot more weight than an opposition member, because that's what you expect. So what I learned in the last few years was how powerful it was for me as a member of the third party, as far away as you could get from government in that room, that it was up to me to compliment the department when they did something right. Because if you don't compliment them on what they're doing right, then, and you attack them when they're wrong, they walk around saying, I can't win with that Public Accounts Committee. No matter what I do, their job is to make my life hell and to make me look bad on TV. And so if they're doing something right, especially where they're fixing something, go out of your way. And I say this to the opposition members, take it upon yourself to even start out with a compliment, because that way the criticisms work better. But to compliment them legitimately on when they're doing something right and have done something well. And that builds personal credibility, because I can talk about how you could be on this committee and segue it into getting reelected, because I did it 5 times. So it's not just quietly going along. It's also, there's a political angle to this. You can develop a reputation, as Kevin pointed out, different from the one you had. I was known as kind of a firebrand in the House and all that stuff. And that's why when he saw me on this committee, he thought, oh, how are we ever going to get nonpartisan? Well, that guy here. And yet what I found was that after I'd been in politics for 35 years, I was getting a kick out of finding a way to bring us all together, rather than getting yet another little headline that, Christofferson attacks government. Well, that gets weary after a while, and it doesn't do much for you. But if you could spend an hour and a half in a committee room and you played a bit of a role in helping everybody come together so you can get that unanimous report, you've done some really good work. You've done work as important as a cabinet member, because you were willing to look at the bigger picture and do the job the way it needs to be done. It's not gotcha. You want to change behavior. You want the bureaucrats to recognize that when there are steps in a process, that there's a reason they're in there. And we often find that when we get horrible things like Phoenix, what it is a perfect storm of a bunch of little things and one or two big things that went wrong, and you put them all together and suddenly you've got a boondoggle. And so what you want to do is change the behavior of those bureaucrats, not so that you can get a headline saying, I told the government off, but that there's all kinds of bureaucrats who are changing the way they approach their job and change the way they behave. That's the win. In a perfect world, we would get an auditor report that comes in and says, everything's great. See you later. One time, I'll end on this, Chair, we had an agency come in, and it was a very small agency. I never heard of it before. And they came in, and there was this amazing report. And
Museum.
It was just, they did a couple of things wrong. You remember, Kevin? And there were a couple of things wrong, minor. Nobody can survive that kind of a review without finding something wrong. But they did all the right things the right way. So when it became my turn, and again, this is only experience. I didn't do all this in the beginning. But when it came and I had this report and I looked at it and I said, you know what? If we had reports like this from everybody, life would be exactly the way it is. I only have one question, Chair, and that would have been you, Kevin. And I'm looking at you now as if it's happening in the moment. I said, Chair, I just want to ask them to tell us why and how they are so wonderful. What do they do that makes them so great? And I gave them my time to brag about what they did. They walked out of there floating. And you could bet there were a whole lot of other agency CEOs and presidents and deputies who were thinking, I want to leave the room like that. I want them saying I'm the best deputy there ever was. And as long as you can show them that that can happen, you will change behavior. And if you're changing behavior, colleagues or MPs, you're winning. You're doing what that job is about. Because if all you're doing is finding mistakes forever, then it's endless. What you want to do is find mistakes, make sure they're corrected, and ensure that mistake doesn't happen again. If you do that as a committee, you are playing a major role in the way that taxpayer money is spent and the way that programs are implemented. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. I am experiencing some real internal tension here. I would like us to continue on with the questions that I know you have. It is almost 10 after 1. I am here in Ottawa. I am supposed to be on house duty. Question period is coming and I have to get to the house. Would you like to carry on for just a few more minutes, or are we able to adjourn the meeting? Because I think we need to respect everybody's time. Mr. Fergus?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too am 5 minutes late now for another meeting, but I would love to ask just one question if it's possible. But I know other members had their hands up before me, so just a brief question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fergus. I have had other members indicate that that they do need to leave the meeting and that we should actually end the meeting because we are almost 10 minutes over. Would you be willing to contact Mr. Christofferson or Mr. Sorensen or Mr. Murphy or Mr. Allison with your questions directly? Could we leave it at that?
Super.
I think that's yeah, I think that's what I will have to do. And just before we adjourn, I would just like to let the members know that our next meeting will be Thursday, October 29th at 11 a.m. and we EST, and we will meet with the Auditor General. If the committee is in agreement, we'll hold the first hour of our meeting in camera to have a briefing in line with the motion adopted at our last meeting, and the second hour would be in public to study the main estimates. Are we agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us. It has been a tremendous hour with you, and our first hour was also very informative. So thank you all, and I will now adjourn the meeting.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, I'd like, before we, in the next meeting, could we respect the schedule so that I think it's important for members to be able to ask questions and
Merci à vous.
Thank you.